Sorry?
Oh, there you are. There you are. Okay. What time
So
is it?
should we start? It's 7:35. What do you think? Should we start?
7:32.
Yeah. Caroline has thumbs up. She wants us to start. What do you think, Vicky? Should we start?
Oh, whenever you're ready. I
Yeah.
can't, I'm still working on my screen.
Yeah. Judy says thumbs up too. Okay. Well,
Oh, I get
let's
it.
start. And if others join, then gradually they can catch up. I wanted to welcome everyone to this initiative. It's just the first of see how it goes. If there is enough interest to continue it once a week, once every other week, or whatever form. The idea is to use some of the Baha'i writings and then invite folks like yourself to share your thoughts and feelings, questions about these short passages. So it's more like me facilitating and then you folks speaking. So you may want to have a way of maybe putting your mics on mute, and when you want to speak, then unmute it or something like that. There aren't many, so I'm sure we can manage. And I was told that the session is also being recorded right now on YouTube. So don't be surprised if you see your face. I don't know what they're going to do with the YouTube version, if they're going to upload it or what, but that's what.
Gee, I would have put on my eyebrows if I'd known that, Farhad.
I don't know if they're going to upload it or what, but this is something that I was told like 10 minutes ago. That's what they were planning to do. So I hope it won't scare off future participants, but let's see how it. But everybody's small, so there's one advantage of you're all going to come very small. So you can see the screen. This is we thought to call it Kindling Our Spirits. By the way, is my volume okay? Is it too loud? Can you hear me clearly?
Can hardly hear
thumbs
you.
up or thumb. You can hear. Is it hard to hear? Okay. We call it Kindling Our Spirits, and we thought nowadays, just like starting a fire that you need to kindle, maybe every now and then one needs to do some extra effort to make our spirits more alive, more, excited. There are so many not so nice things are happening. So, and the topic, Lois thought we can start with happiness. So let's see how it goes. So to begin with, let me go to next slide. Okay, Lois, do you mind? Lois is going to help reading them, and then I may say a few words, and then I'll invite you if there is something you'd like to mention about these short passages. Lois, would you kindly read it?
The manifestation of God describes the reality which is conducive to the happiness, health, and development of mankind. His teachings serve as a compass to help us find our way in the new world. They outline not only what is good for mankind, but also the steps to be taken to secure individual freedom and well-being. The Universal House of Justice.
Thank you.
1984.
So what I thought was to start, because nowadays we hear all versions of reality. There are terms like fake news or fake issues, or people twist aspects of reality, and things at times become very confusing. But it looks like the good Lord God has been ahead of this project. And when he sends these entities that we refer to them as manifestations of God, people like Baha'u'llah, Christ, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, that they come roughly every 1,000 years, will they provide for us the latest version of that reality that we are ready to understand and see? So we call it progressive revelation. And it appears that we need to constantly, just like a compass, use what they provide as a way of navigating through life. So we're going to use that type of approach towards this theme of happiness. Any thought, input about this short passage? No? I'm going to see, because I don't, if you unmute your mic and say something, that's fine. So in case I don't see you when you're doing it, so feel free to jump in. If two people jumped in, then we can take turns. Okay. We thought to start with this short passage from a more of a global perspective, and then we're going to narrow down to individual happiness. Okay, Lois, please.
We desire but the good of the world and happiness of the nations, that all nations should become one in faith and all men as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened, that diversity of religion should cease and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Baha'u'llah. Spoken to E.Q. Brown, 1890.
So this is something that the latest manifestation of God, or some people refer to as prophet, said to perhaps the only person from the West who met Baha'u'llah like 2 years before Baha'u'llah passed away. What I thought would be interesting for our discussion tonight is this concept of happiness of nations. It's such a lofty theme when you think about it. Normally, when it comes to happiness, we equate it to, individuals. And it's very difficult to try to see how a happy nation would look like or act like. And yet this appears to be the plan of God, to make all nations happy. And that's might be a bit of a bumpy road, but the concept itself, I thought would be nice to kind of remind ourselves that this latest religion promotes the whole process of happiness of nations. Any questions, any thoughts?
I think he gives us some clues in there about what it will take until we really have happiness worldwide and happiness of nations. The elimination of racial prejudice, where we all are members of one family. We don't have race. Race is a fallacy. And when mankind gets rid of some of those things which cause unhappiness in the world, we will be happy. When we have peace in the world and there isn't, all kinds of bloodshed and, people have security, they will have a chance to be happy. So there's a lot of information in that quote about what it's going to take before we have happiness worldwide.
Right.
And I like just that very simple words. What harm is there in this?
Right. Makes you wonder, like, who feels perhaps threatened by such a concept that they would put the messenger of such message in prison for that length of time? Like, what would those people be afraid of? And it looks like that type of happiness of nations may happen when eventually we have this, what is known in the Baha'i writings as most great peace, that long-lasting peace that every religion has been promoting, that eventually will happen. So it's a bit of a long road ahead of us.
The other thing I like about that little phrase, what harm is there in this, is I think that it might cause some people who are ready to dispute or argue or prove a point, it might cause them to kind of simmer down.
You hope? Yeah.
Would you say this concept of happiness of nations is unique to this latest manifestation of God? Like previous manifestations of God promoted happiness as well, but was it ever on this level or this scale?
Well, to my knowledge, when you put it in the progressive formation of, you know, our civilization from villages and towns and eventually of nations, that the means for the needs of all these nations coming together is the first time that has been provided. So it is a manageable goal, as long as people won't get in the way, unfortunately. So to my knowledge, no, this is like a first, especially the concept of, because happiness, you could find, it's very difficult to find many references about happiness in previous religions. The Baha'i writings, we're going to see there are many passages that explain what it is, how to go about it, and things like it, because we have the capacity now to really address ourselves to how to achieve it. Should I go on to next one? Okay. So I'll read this one. You know, sometimes when you see, we thought to give this heading, when you're happy, which part is happy? Because normally, when it comes to happiness, I was thinking the closest that I could think of is when a very young child, let's say 1 year old, 2 year old, when they're so happy that the whole face is beaming with happiness, perhaps that's the closest one could think of the state of happiness. So this passage from the writings of the Baha'i faith throws more light on like who is really happy. As this physical frame is the throne of the inner temple, whatever occurs to the former is felt by the latter. So what is the former? Former is that frame, and latter is the inner temple. In reality, that which makes delight in joy or is saddened by pain is the inner temple of the body, not the body itself. So that phrase, inner temple, is another word for it would be, let's say, one's soul, which is another subject of exploration. That granting that participants tonight are in agreement that every human being has a soul, based on explanation or passages like this, when a person is happy, that soul is happy. When the person is sad, the soul is sad. Now you could reflect on some of the ways that in our society nowadays we address, let's say if somebody is sad, what forms of chemicals and other substances we put that person on as an example, and to what degree one needs to understand what is making that person sad and how to go about addressing some of those issues. Hi, Max. There is Max. There is my grandson. Hi, Max. Nice to see you. Any thoughts about this passage? Is that something you feel one can easily accept? When a person is happy, their soul is happy. some people say you can see. We attended one year one of a gathering known as a Baha'i summer school, and this instructor in one of the sessions, he said, I want to help you guys to become happy. So we said, okay, what do we have to do? He says, I want you all to look at me. And then he says, your assignment is that you're supposed to smile without moving any muscle of your face. And there was like 50 of us in that room. We looked at each other, we said, well, you can't do that. When you smile, normally different muscles move. So nobody could easily do it. He says, here, I show you. But said, you have to really look at me. So we started looking at him, and you know, he started smiling through his eyes. And you could feel it, you know. And perhaps that maybe that's the closest that one can become aware of the sentiments behind eyes and how it commutes itself, that how that person feels and thinks at that moment. That maybe that's becomes more convincing that it is the soul that is happy, not just the body. Should I move on? Okay, now let's see if you guys want to take turns in reading. Who would like to read? It's a very short one. If you like to read, just read it. Don't wait too long, just read it. Caroline, are you going to read? Looks like you're going to read. But you're mute. I think you're mute.
Okay, I don't have my eyeglasses, but okay.
Oh, you don't have your eyeglasses. Okay.
2 kinds of happiness. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Know that there are 2 kinds of happiness, spiritual and material.
Thank you.
Is there more?
No,
Okay, this was written
yes, we're
December 31st, in 1916 by Abdul Baha.
Yes. Now that's another very straightforward statement that is very difficult to find in other sources associated with religion. That Baha'i faith clearly says there are 2 kinds, broadly speaking, of happiness. One material and one spiritual. So let's go explore each one of them, see what are they. Now that we know there are 2 broad kinds. Okay, Farhad, would you like to read this one?
Sure. As to material happiness, it never exists. Nay, is but imagination, an image reflected in mirrors, specter and shadow. Consider the nature of material happiness. It is something which but slightly removes one's afflictions. Yet, the people imagine it to be joy, delight, exaltation, and blessing. All the material blessings, including food, drink, etc., tend only to allay thirst, hunger, and fatigue. They bestow no delights on the mind or pleasure on the soul. Nay, they furnish only the bodily wants. So this kind of happiness has no real existence. Abdul Baha from Star of West, 1916.
Thank you. So how does that sound? So much for physical happiness.
I certainly wouldn't disagree with it now that I've actually read it. However, how many times in expressing gratitude do I say, oh, I'm grateful for such a good night's sleep? So maybe
Yes.
that's a material form.
Yes. Well, you know, again, it's interesting. Like if you say, we are grateful for a good night's sleep, you could ask, which part of me had a good night's sleep? Was it once again the body, or was it the soul? Or was it a combination of both? you know, like there are ways of viewing some of these terms that in some shape or form, as long as we become reminded that after all, we are spiritual beings in this temple of the body. So we give due credit to the engine behind the body. You know, I don't know if that makes sense. Any other thoughts about this material happiness? If I win a lottery and I become very happy and I think of all the money that I get, is that true happiness or is that imagination?
Well, this imagination is a quality of the soul.
Mhm.
Can you speak to that a little bit for me?
Well, you know, as long as I become aware of, because you know, as one thinks, you get into the whole subject of who's thinking. Because some people put the mind as like the master of an individual. It's my mind that does the thinking. What you find in Baha'i writings that you see the mind is just a link between the soul and the body. It's actually the soul that does the thinking, using the mind as an interface, using the brain, the chemistry of the brain, the synapses and so on. It's the mind that is the soul that sees, is the soul that tastes. So the body is an instrument for the soul to operate. So when you take it from that perspective, the imagination could be the product of how the mind tries to impose on the soul compared to being the other way around, like the soul transmitting it to the mind. Because the mind can become like a barrier to the soul as well. So there could be a combination of both in some situation, you know, like a person, for instance, you hear they wake up in the middle of night and they compose this magnificent song, music, and they don't know how it happened. And we say that what they were inspired. Well, then who inspired that person? Was that the soul of that person that received and then passed it on, and the mind was receptive, so it communicated without blocking it? So the same thing could apply to the whole domain of imagination.
But you're not saying imagination is not a quality of the soul, are you?
No, no.
Yeah, okay.
No, I'm not saying that, no. I'm just saying that the mind may influence the imagination that the soul needs to be allowed to
Support,
convey.
contribute to.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Should I move on to the next one?
Mhm.
Let's see about spiritual happiness. Who would like to? Meshkin, would you like to read the next one, please?
As to spiritual happiness, this is the true basis of the life of man, because life, the spiritual, is created for happiness, not for sorrow, for pleasure, not for grief. Happiness is life, sorrow is death. Spiritual happiness is life eternal. This is light, which is not followed by darkness. This is honor, which is not followed by shame. This is existence, which is not followed by annihilation. This great blessing and precious gift is obtained by man only through the guidance of God. This happiness is the fundamental basis from which man is created. Worlds are originated. The contingent beings have existence, and the world of God appears like unto the appearance of the sun at midday. This happiness is but the love of God. Abdul Baha.
See how the spiritual happiness on a broad scale is linked now to the love of God. And sometimes you come across people who may financially, physically not be in a good position, and yet they could be beaming with happiness. Maybe they have more love of God in their heart that generates that happy vibes. At the same time, you come across people who, from a material point of view, are immersed in all kinds of wealth, and yet you don't sense happiness radiating from them. And you notice, he said, life is created for happiness, not sorrow. That's another interesting concept that Baha'i faith promotes, that we are meant to be happy. And everything in the society is supposed to gradually, with time, provide that level of happiness. It's very difficult to visualize a society that majority of people are happy. Have you ever seen some of these, I believe is in India, certain villages, they all get together and they start laughing. And as they laugh, they start laughing more. It's so contagious. Have you ever seen YouTubes of that? When you watch it, you start laughing yourself because the group is so happy. It's so contagious. So that's the closest I could think of if the whole, let's say, town is all happy. Any thoughts, more thoughts on spiritual happiness?
No, I have a thought.
Please.
I have many friends who, well, because my situation is not one of riches, and I don't have a lot of worldly possessions, but I have happiness within me. It's like my heart smiles, you know? It's a feeling I keep. I have a friend that says, I just wish I could do something for you. I just wish I could help you. And I go, I'm, very happy. I don't know what their what their problem is. I don't need more things to feel that wonderful warm glow inside. My heart smiles all the time. There are some times when it smiles more than others, but I choose to hold that feeling within me. So maybe when I am with somebody who does not have that joy, maybe that comes through to them. That's something that I can give away and it costs me nothing.
Well, it's a blessing if you feel that type of happiness within you. We're going to hear some other passages that may throw some light where that happiness comes from, that we become the recipient of it. So when we say we are blessed, we become aware of where does it come from. Okay, let's go to the next one. Who would like to read this one? Who? Edgar, would you like to read this one? Is your mic working okay, or?
Knowledge, a source of joy, of cheer and gladness. In truth, knowledge is a veritable treasure for man and a source of glory, of bounty, of joy, of exaltation, of cheer and gladness unto him. Happy the man that cleaveth unto it, and will betide the heedless. Baha'u'llah.
So here is one interesting aspect of how in the Baha'i faith, the promotion of knowledge in general, harmony of science and religion, concepts that when a person is working hard in whatever field they are doing, that God would consider that as worship. You see that it's a way that perhaps that type of happiness can also be attained by those individuals. And I'm sure if we have somebody in our midst that they've been working very hard either to compose something or create something, and the minute it's done, that joy of finally having it done, you could see the happiness in their face. And it's nice to know that one way of becoming happy is to become more knowledgeable. It's an interesting concept itself. It keeps the mind more active as well. One becomes more and more aware of one's ignorance. So we give more credit to the creator that has managed to create whatever we are trying to understand about. And in the process, one becomes perhaps more and more grateful for that whole process of knowledge. So I thought at least to keep in mind that that's another source of happiness. Now here is something that as you're thinking of who's going to read it, it's a confirmation that each one of us has a star of happiness in our heart. Each one of us has a star of happiness. Incredible concept. Who would like to read it? Caroline, you would like to read it? Yeah. No?
I can read.
Sure, please.
The world needs more happiness and illumination. The star of happiness is in every heart. We must remove the clouds so that it may twinkle radiantly. Happiness is an internal condition. When it is once established, man will ascend to the supreme heights of bliss. A truly happy man will not be subject to the shifting eventualities of time. Like unto an eternal king, he will sit upon the throne of fixed realities. He will be impervious to outward changing circumstances, and through his deeds and actions, he will impart happiness to others. A Baha'i must be happy, for the blessings of God are bestowed upon him. Every soul must strive to impart to mankind that joy and happiness, the nature of which is permanent. Abdul-Baha, Star of the West, 1922.
Thank you. So next time you look in the mirror, let's remind ourselves that I have a star of happiness in my heart. And the question then becomes, what are those clouds that I need to work on to allow that happiness to come through? So here becomes whole phases of life to work on those issues. I'm just being reminded as we are talking about it, my mother who passed away a few years ago, every time I looked at him, she had that smile on her face, even though she had gone through a lot in her life, that she would have become very upset at many issues. But you would never see her angry about any of those. She always maintained that inner happiness that showed in her face as well. I'm sure you can think of individuals too that often you see them happy, not trying hard to be happy, but they're just happy people. So maybe their cloud is less thick as some other clouds.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
You know, this quote from Abdul-Baha reminds me what he told a reporter one time, that it's easy to be happy when you're in comfort and everything is going well and you have, you know, all the things you need. It's something else to be happy when you're going through difficulties and when you have nothing and, you know, you're suffering. He says you have to be happy at that time too. And I don't know if you've got any of those, that particular reference coming up or not. But he gave the example of himself, that he was in prison for 40 years of his life. And yet that prison cell, was like absolute freedom to him. And he was happy during all that time. So, I mean, that's an example for us that no matter, what kind of situation we have, or, the trials we're going through, the difficulties we're going through, we have to have that inner happiness. It's not the material happiness, it's the spiritual happiness we need to cultivate.
Yes, thanks for mentioning it. Speaking of Abdul Baha and his happiness, one of the incidents, because Abdul Baha came to North America in 1912, and one of the incidents that one of his individuals who accompanied him recorded, he says that the Baha'is had rented this one room in one of the hotels in this city, and they were so excited, they wanted to make sure that Abdul Baha was happy with the room arrangement, and whatever efforts went into providing him with that relative comfort. And he assured them that he's happy and he's very thankful. After they left, he told his person that had been accompanying him during his journey, he said, these believers are very thoughtful, very kind. At the same time, they don't realize that I had to, for like 2 years, he had to sleep in the morgue of the barrack, the prison, that he was confined with his father, Baha'u'llah, because there wasn't enough room for him to be with the rest, because they had put something like 15 of them in one small room. And he says others trying to be courteous towards him, they were trying to make more space. There was not enough space, so he excused himself, and the only place left was the morgue of the barrack. And here the master slept there for 2 years. And he says, but he was happy. That's what he had, that's what he could do. And he says, now this room is like a palace. It's in comparison, it's one doesn't need something like that to be happy, but he didn't want to hurt their feelings, but not thanking them as well. So when you read some of the accounts of Abdul Baha's life to see what he went through and how much he emphasized happiness, and he was known as a bringer of happiness himself too, it puts things in an interesting context, how we should view the comforts of life and equate them with happiness. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now, here is some insights into, as Lois mentioned, like it's easy to be happy when everything is going fine, but then how can one maintain happiness when we encounter certain afflictions in life, certain difficulties, certain circumstances that we wish they didn't happen? Lois, would you like to read it, please?
Afflictions and troubles are due to a state of not being content with what God has ordained for you. If one submits himself to God, he is happy. A man asked another, "In what station are you?" He answered, "In the utmost happiness." "Where does this happiness come from?" He answered, "Because all existing things move according to my wish, therefore I do not find anything contrary to my desire. Thus I have no sorrow. There is no doubt that all beings move by the will of God, and I have given up my own will, desiring the will of God. Thus my will becomes the will of God, for there is nothing to myself. All are moving by his will, yet they are moving by mine. In this case, I am very happy. When man surrenders himself, everything will move according to his wish." Words of Abdul Baha, taken at Akka, 1909.
Now, this is a subject for perhaps more in-depth sharing as well, if one would like to. but to become content with the will of God and to strive to understand what the will of God is and gradually embrace it and use one's mind and reasoning in the process as well is a lifelong process. But the aspect of becoming content and not at times fighting with situations that are beyond one's ability to do anything about anyway, like to forgive and not to be so upset that next time I'm going to see that person, I'm going to do this and this and this. You know, concepts that bring some degree of resignation and calmness. So as a result, one can cope with it and become happier in the process of going through it compared to somebody who hasn't had that type of difficulty. And just again, very briefly, to give you a short example was, again, for some reason, I keep thinking about my mother tonight. When they were in Iran, 1 year, when they came to see my sister, Farhad, maybe Farhad can tell the story, the airport, they had done some renovations in Tehran, and they had a major snowfall. They had removed certain pillars, supporting pillars. And so while my parents were waiting to see my sister off, this whole one portion of the upper floor collapsed, like the whole concrete, everything came down. And my mother and her sister were sitting on a bench, and the force of this debris forced them down. And she said she could hear her sister suffocated, right, sitting next to her. And she was covered by this amount of concrete and a small hole, like a pocket of air that she was breathing, trying to keep herself calm. And she was praying. She was saying one of the Baha'i prayers, is there any remover of difficulty, save God, that prayer, over and over. In the meantime, my dad had noticed where it had happened, and he was beyond himself, and many people came, and finally they managed to do some digging and found my mother and took her out. It was a miracle. It made the headlines of a national newsletter that they found a woman alive. And then she was telling me that some years later, some person was telling her, asking her that you must have been really, really upset for what they had done. And as a result, this floor came down. You lost your sister. You almost became paralyzed. You must have been really upset when you were under the debris. And my mother's answer is amazing. She said, no. I says, I was just praying for whatever is meant to happen to happen. And saying that prayer with that sense of resignation, like she was content at that moment to what has happened, kept her calm enough that she managed not to finish the amount of oxygen that was available to her in that type of situation and stay alive. You know, like when you hear like stories like that, one could then draw one's own situation. If circumstances contrary to my will happen, should I really become upset, or should I try to calm myself down and kind of see if there isn't anything I could do to be content with that whole process? I have a feeling that my mother is also participating tonight in this gathering. Meshkin knows. Okay, let's go to the next one. Meshkin, would you like to read the next one, please?
Concentrate the soul upon God, so that it may become as a fountain pouring out the water of life to a thirsty world. Live up to the principles of sacrifice. The world will then become as nothing and be without power to attract you away from God. Sacrifice your will to the will of God. The kingdom is attained by the one who forgets self. Everything becomes yours by renunciation of everything. Words of Abdul Baha.
You know, so maybe this is like a clue how to become content. One needs to concentrate on God. Now, in our society nowadays, we don't receive encouragement to concentrate on God. Unfortunately, when the word God is mentioned in any conversation, it's not done in a praiseworthy way. People blame things and then they use certain phrases that the word God enters the conversation. But the training to concentrate one's soul upon God is an interesting process itself. How could one with time become comfortable to undertake that type of concentration? And what does it mean? How does one concentrate on God when one can't understand what God is? Because, you know, have you heard when people say, how in the world would God do such a thing? You feel like telling them, well, let's see. We are trying to understand the mind of God. Well, how do you understand the mind of the Creator? There is no way a human being created by the Creator understand the mind of the Creator. You know, so it's an interesting process itself, but looks like it's a way of forgetting self by thinking about the Creator. Any thoughts on that? These are all ways of becoming happy, don't forget.
Concentration makes me think about meditation. And there's different forms of meditation that emphasize focusing in on one point or a focal point. It's kind of like the basis of mindfulness. And I think that in itself, just the action of doing that would bring us closer to what we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. Okay, let's go to the next one. Judy, would you like to read the next one?
No, you have Pele and Max on the call too, Farhad.
Are they too? Pele, would you like to read the next one, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Contentment is the creator of happiness. Man must live in contentment with the conditions of his time. He must not make himself the slave of any habit. Contentment is real wealth. If one develops within himself the quality of contentment, he will become independent. Contentment is the creator of happiness. When one is contented, he does not care for either riches or poverty. He lives above the influence of them. Words of Abdul Baha from the Diary of Ahmed Sohrab.
Thanks, Pele.
Welcome.
So what do you think of contentment being the creator of happiness? Who would have thought one way to become happy is to become content? Is that obvious, or do you think that takes efforts?
Well, I don't really see the difference. Like, how is being content any different from being happy?
Mm-hmm.
In French, content is happy. Same word.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I think there's a little difference in English, though, isn't there? One is content. One isn't looking for more or something different. One is just happy with what one has. And if you're happy with what you have, you're not looking at your neighbor and saying, oh, my neighbor has a nicer car, or my neighbor has, you know, a nicer house, or
Not what I'm saying.
I wish I had that.
Well, where does the thought of satisfaction, I'm satisfied with what I have, where does that come in?
Well, would that be a form of contentment too, when one is satisfied? And then you go one step further, even one becomes grateful. Mm-hmm. You know? The concept of the grass is greener on the neighbor's side, you know, compared to things one takes for granted in what one already has, and to become more grateful, perhaps that would help to become content and hence one becomes happier too.
But I still don't understand how being content is any different from being happy.
I think they're fairly similar. If one is happy with what one has and is not looking always for something different or something more,
I mean, like when they're content with what they have.
mhm.
But then that's still being content. But I guess you could also, I mean, I guess they're not exactly the same because you could be happy but still be looking for more and not be
So
content.
contentment would be something where it's just a constant, like it's a constant thing. Happiness is fleeting.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference between the two. I would also say maybe that contentment is like peace, whereas happiness is like a catharsis, like a stronger emotion.
Yeah. Like if you're content, you're at peace with what you have or what your situation is. If you're happy, you feel elation of of thing.
Yeah. Okay, well, now that we solved that one, let's go to the next one.
Well, I wanted to say that I think detachment is involved in probably both of those things.
Right.
Yeah, you're not going to get everything you want, so you're detached. If you're not detached, you won't be content. And if you're not content, I mean, maybe you could be happy without being content.
I think there's a saying that happiness isn't getting what you want.
Yeah.
Happiness is wanting what you've got. So it's like being satisfied with what you have, whether it's allowed or not.
Yeah, but I feel like that's being content. You can be happy while being content. I don't know, it's kind of weird.
I think it's very easy to be to get confused over this. I am looking up the words and it says contentment is a peaceful kind of happiness in which one rests without desire, even though every wish may not have been granted.
Yeah, so basically it's okay, some stuff didn't happen, some stuff happened, but I'm okay with that.
Yes, you're content with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
happiness.
quality of contentment comes first.
Yeah, you can't be happy without being content.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, this quote is correct.
Wow, you guys are good. Very good. Wow.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Are we content to go to the next one? Okay, here is some kind of a warning, because again, don't forget, these are all in the context of being happy and ways of becoming happy. So we thought to call it the dangers of wealth. Who would like to read it?
I could read it unless someone else.
Please, yeah.
Okay. The dangers of wealth. Wealth has a tempting and drawing quality. It bewilders the sight of its charmed victim and showy appearances, and then draws them on and on to the edge of a yawning chasm. It makes a person self-centered, self-occupied, forgetful of God and holy things. On the other hand, there are souls who are the essence of existence. In their estimation, wealth offers no attraction. Their intense passion for God will wax greater each day. Such rich men are in reality the light-bringing stars of the heaven of mankind, because they have been tried and tested and have come out of the crucible as pure gold, unalloyed and unadulterated. With all the wealth of the world at their feet, they are yet mindful of God and humanity. They spend the required riches for the dispelling of the darkness of ignorance, and employ their treasures for the alleviation of the misery of the children of God. The light of such rich men will never grow dim, and the tree of their generosity will grow in size and stature, producing fruits in all seasons. Their every deed will be as an example for succeeding generations. Words of Al-Dubaha from the Diary of Ahmad Sohrab.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So can one be always seeking wealth at the same time say, I'm going to be selfless and not self-centered?
Yeah,
Can a person do that?
I think so.
How?
I mean, if they're trying to get wealth because they feel like that's the only way they can help people, and they're doing it in a selfish way, a selfless way, then I feel like, yeah, they are being selfless. They are being selfless.
So as long as they have some lofty goals of not accumulating all that wealth for themselves, you're saying it's okay, right?
Yeah, if their actions are good, and they have good intentions, and they follow through with those good intentions, then I feel like, yeah, they're selfless.
Right.
If
What
they-
is
if
that
they're
verse
doing-
in
if
the
they're
Bible?
being if they're being selfish in their decisions and the way they spend their wealth, then no, they're not being selfless. They're being selfish.
Right. What is that verse in the Bible that says it's very difficult for a rich man to enter heaven? Does anybody know the passage?
I think it's something like it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get to heaven, something like that.
Right, something like that, yeah. And the eye of a needle, it looks like it's a very tight spot in certain portion of the passages, different parts of a mountain, or when you're hiking, that you can, even a person can hardly get through it. So wealth has its own dangers. You find some passages, like even in the Baha'i writings, that wealth is compared to like the rust that a piece of iron craves, absorbs, and eventually that rust would destroy the iron. So it's one of those things that it requires a lot of self-discipline to see if the person equates wealth with happiness, for instance, well, then we have a problem, because now that person is becoming very materialistic. It's all material happiness. But as was mentioned, if that person views wealth towards helping the poor and helping others, well, that's a different situation. And there are individuals in the society that one could think of that try to do that type of looking after the poor and needy by using their own wealth. But we thought at least to have that something to be aware.
Sorry, Farhad, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm going to be leaving, and love to all.
Thank you, Faride. Thank you.
Bye, Faride June.
Bye. Thank you.
Good luck to your Ruhi class.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now we're gonna, the last few slides are now we started with like a world view towards this field of happiness, like when nations are happy. So we're gonna gradually finish once again, moving up and viewing the impact of happiness and the virtual happiness on the human world. These are ways that the society with time will advance and evolve and become much better. But these are just few samples of it. Who would like to read it that hasn't read so far?
Becoming free of the human world and development of human conscience. The third freedom is that which is born of obedience to the laws and ordinances of the Almighty. This is the freedom of the human world, where man severs his affections from all things. When he does so, he becomes immune to all hardship and sorrow. Wealth or material power will not deflect him from moderation and fairness. Neither will poverty or need inhibit him from showing forth happiness and tranquility. The more the conscience of man develops, the more will his heart be free and his soul attain unto happiness. And that is Abdul Baha, 1998, quoted by the Universal House of Justice.
Thank you. Now, you know, the parts in it, like the development of human conscience and linking it to happiness. You know, these are amazing concepts, like how does human conscience gradually develops? You know, like some of the movements nowadays, for instance, in US and many other countries, instead of the rights of, let's say, Black people, Black Lives Matter, and things like it, are these phases of the conscience of humanity evolving and growing and becoming more balanced? And what type of society will result once that type of collective conscience has moved on to a higher level? But it's amazing that these processes also have an effect on the collective happiness. And there is a religion that identifies these components of this process of becoming happy. Should we move on? Any thoughts about it? Here is, I read this one. Here is again along these lines of some of these guiding principles that God in his wisdom provides to humanity through his manifestation for the phases that humanity is going through. And then it becomes known as, like, for instance, guiding principles. But then it becomes a matter of whether humanity wants to adopt these individually and gradually collectively, or we want to pursue our own ways of doing things. And then as a result, we may not become happy, which was meant for us to become. The guiding principles of the Baha'is are honesty, love, charity, and trustworthiness, the setting of the common good above private interest, and the practice of godliness, virtue, and moderation. Ultimately, then, their preservation and happiness are assured. Whatever misfortunes they may encounter, wrought by the wiles of the schemer and ill-wisher, shall all pass away like waves, and hardship shall be succeeded by joy. The friends are under the protection of the resistless power and inscrutable providence of God. So, like, keeping in mind, like, these aspect components of being happy are linked to being honest, being loving, having charity and qualities like trustworthiness, the common good above private interest, you know, becoming more selfless, the practice of godliness, knowing, you know, exhibiting virtues of God, moderation. All these, if one tries to strive towards adopting them in one's life, it looks like one is more assured that will approach the state of happiness more. Compared to, let's say, if I'm trying to be dishonest and dishonest to this person, but honest to that person, and then if I can be dishonest to this person and so on, well, gradually that person may get a headache, not to mention even being happy. So it's better to adopt these ways, but these are defined as ingredients for this whole process of becoming happy, which is really the goal of every religion when you think about it.
Do you have that short quote about this, Farhad? I don't want to mention one if you've got it coming up. The one about human happiness?
Yes, it's coming up, yeah.
Okay, so I will be quiet.
Yeah. And here is another concept. Lois, would you mind reading this one, please?
Be just. Can this nominal civilization, unsupported by a genuine civilization of character, bring about the peace and well-being of the people, or win the good pleasure of God? Does it not rather connote the destruction of man's estate and pull down the pillars of happiness and peace?
So again, looking at it on a global, high-level way, societal, nation, the whole world. See, the concepts in the Baha'i faith that refers to like this civilization of character. What does that mean? To what degree these aspects of human beings need to be addressed. So our collective character would represent the virtues that God has endowed each human being. It gives you a glimpse for what a long road is ahead for these issues gradually being addressed, and what degree of patience and resignation, contentment, all these qualities are needed. At the same time, becoming aware that the Baha'i religion addresses itself to all these issues of not only individual, but the society and the whole world. It's remarkable when you think about it, the interrelationship of all these components and how they are being articulated for us to address. Okay, there are just a couple of slides left. Here is a prayer. If somebody would like to read it, I've highlighted two parts because then you see where does this happiness come from? When earlier we were saying that some people are just gifted with happiness. And Rose, would you like to read this prayer?
Create in me a pure heart, O my God, and renew a tranquil conscience within me, O my hope. Through the spirit of power, confirm thou me in thy cause. O my best beloved, and by the light of thy glory, reveal unto me thy path, O thou, the goal of my desire. Through the power of thy transcendent might, lift me up unto the heaven of thy holiness. O source of my being, and by the breezes of thine eternity, gladden me. O thou who art my God, let thine everlasting melodies breathe tranquility on me, O my companion, and let the riches of thine ancient countenance deliver me from all except thee, O my master. And let the tidings of the revelation of thine incorruptible essence bring me joy, O thou who art the most manifest of the manifest and the most hidden of the hidden.
Thank you. Notice those lines like before the green words, like, and by the breezes of thine eternity gladden me. What are those breezes? We don't see them, but that they have an existence. And then the other line, thine incorruptible essence, bring me joy. Looks like joy comes to us from an entity. Like these aspects of creation, as we become aware, it helps one to become more dependent on like these spiritual dimension that one can see, and yet it's in existence and it has its own operations. And one becomes aware that I'm so dependent. Like for instance, when they say these explosions that take place on the sun every now and then, what do they call them? These magnetic waves that every now and then comes and would disturb all kinds of communications. So the science becomes aware that there are these waves of energy that could disrupt. Well, that's on a disruption basis, but that's the nature of the sun. But imagine if one becomes more and more convinced of these waves of joy that comes from this dimension. What attracts them? How would collective humanity, for instance, attract such waves of joy? Just concepts to keep in mind, that all we need to do is to become more and more a recipient. They are in existence, but I just have to make myself the type that can receive such forms of energy. And here is another one that brings to your attention, well, again, a portion of a prayer from Baha'u'llah. It says, O thou, speaking about God, O thou by whose name the sea of joy moveth, and the fragrance of happiness is wafted. I ask thee to show me from the wonders of thy favor that which shall brighten my eyes and shall gladden my heart. So there is an entity called the Sea of Joy. Where is it? You know, you wish you could get few drops from that sea. When science finds out that there are these huge, let's say, black holes in existence that gobble up other black holes, we become aware that there are aspects of creation that we are really clueless, even on a physical realm. Imagine to what degree on spiritual realm, which have an existence of their own, but we can't see them. There is this sea of joy. Won't you like to go for a swim in that sea? And the fragrance of happiness. What does that mean? How would you smell happiness, fragrance of happiness? So it makes you aware that these concepts that you find in Baha'i prayers or Baha'i writings, it's like as if this algorithm of creation, the manifestation of God is allowed to present to us because we have a capacity to kind of receive and kind of reflect, to see that they do exist. How can I benefit from them? Any comments about the Sea of Joy? Now, one other thing to keep in mind is that one of the aspects of, like for instance, in the Baha'i religion, there is a Baha'i administration to take care of the affairs of the Baha'i community. There is national, there is international. But you come across to some interesting concept that you see even the Baha'i administration, part of its responsibility is to bring happiness to people. This is one passage referring to members of spiritual assemblies. They are known in every city that have at least 9 Baha'is. There is a spiritual assembly. The Guardian wrote that they must disregard utterly their own likes and dislikes, their personal interests and inclinations, and concentrate their minds upon those measures that will conduce to the welfare and happiness of the Baha'i community and promote the common will. So here it is, again, even on an administrative basis, the Baha'i faith promotes happiness. See how happiness is so important. Should I move on? Are you happy with the pace we are going? Yeah.
We're all on mute, Farhad, so you don't have much comment.
When I see heads nodding, I see heads nodding. Okay, here's the quote that Lois was talking. Okay, Lois, here's the one if you want to read it, please.
Okay.
Great job.
In a time to come, morals will degenerate to an extreme degree. It is essential that children be reared in the Baha'i way, that they may find happiness both in this world and the next. If not, they shall be beset with sorrows and troubles. For human happiness is founded upon spiritual behavior. Abdul Baha. I think that's so profound. You know, people search after happiness and, you know, all kinds of material pursuits thinking that they will be happy. And then they wonder why, you know, after a short time, they're not happy again. You know, all kinds of material things that don't give that happiness. And here it's very clear. Our happiness is founded on spiritual behavior. So you say, well, okay, I'm not happy. How come? It's like, maybe I'm not being, you know, very spiritual in my behavior. You know, maybe I'm cheating, or maybe I'm, you know, being mean to people, or maybe, you know, all of those things that we are counseled to be, you know, if we are following those spiritual laws, then we will be happy. And hopefully that will be a gauge to say, okay, I'm not happy. What's wrong?
Mhm.
It's good to look to ourselves. Do
Mhm.
either of you have a page number for that quote in that book?
Well, you know, many of these passages, when I use the electronic version, the pages kind of not paid much attention, but I could find it for you if that.
Well, I think I could go to, I wrote down a little bit of it and I could go to Ocean.
Right. Yeah, you can find it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You notice the aspect of that they may find happiness both in this world and in the next.
Mhm.
You know, that's again something to reflect on. Sometimes we are presented with certain images of next life, as if everything is going to be wonderful, everybody is floating, everybody is enjoying, so on. That could be a figment of imagination of individuals, perhaps, who try to project an understanding of how next life, for instance, is. But it looks like this life plays a very significant part in setting one on the path that one can pursue further in the next life. And that spiritual component, as was mentioned, is very important. Because as you recall, the beginning, Abdul says that really material happiness in a way doesn't exist. Even though, as was mentioned, you benefit from it in some shape or form, but compared to spiritual part, when this body is left behind, you know, all the comfort that we sought for it is going to disappear. But the entity that continues to survive is the soul. So we should make sure that the soul is happy. And here in the context of children, imagine how that puts it in an interesting context. Okay, I think there are two left. Perhaps the happiness of mankind we will realize when women and men coordinate and advance equally, for each is the complement and helpmeet of the other. So here is another, again, in a global way, looking at this subject, that we want to make humanity happy. We got to make sure the equality of men and women becomes so firmly established that men and women become indeed helpmates of each other, and to acknowledge the talents and abilities that each one brings. It has ramifications in marriage, it has ramification in places of work, society, positions, all that. And you could see, even from that perspective, we have some journey now to achieve that type of equality. So we can taste that aspect of happiness from that issue itself being addressed. And lastly, this is the prayer that would end. This prayer is one of the earlier translations, so it may not flow as beautiful as some of the latest ones, but again, it touches on certain aspects of happiness and one's dependence on God and His love. Meshkin, would you like to say this closing prayer, please?
O thou kind God, to me thou art kinder than myself, and thy love is more abundant and more ancient. Whenever I am reminded of thy bestowals, I am made happy and hopeful. If I have been agitated, I obtain ease of heart and soul. If I am sick, I gain eternal health. If I am disloyal, I become loyal. If I have been hopeless, I become hopeful. O thou Lord of the kingdom, cause thou the rejoicing of my heart. Empower my weak spirit and strengthen my exhausted nerves. Illumine thou my eyes, suffer my ears to become hearing, so that I may hearken to the music of the kingdom and attain to the joy and happiness everlasting. Verily, thou art the generous, the giver, the kind. Abdul Baha.
Thanks very much. Well, that's it, folks. hope you're more informed about happiness now than when you started, and hope this sharing of these excerpts will help you to become more happy. Any lasting words anybody likes to share?
Thank you for your time.
Sure, yours too.
Are you going to tell them about the next one, Farhad, and where these quotes will be posted?
Oh yeah, right, thank you. Whatever I shared with you tonight, I'll post it at a site called Kindling Our Spirits, blogspot.com. It was the same site that if you had clicked on the ad to go to get the details for tonight.
On Facebook.
So it's kindling-our-spirits.blogspot.com. So I'm gonna put them there. So it's gonna be in a form that you can just download and reflect on more. And we're gonna use that pattern for next sessions as well. Next one we thought to have on the theme of forgiveness, to see how that's gonna be received. To realize what a lofty station is to become, there are passages in the Baha'i writings that lead you in a direction that if you want to receive God's forgiveness, we need to become more forgiving towards each other. So it's an interesting thing to become more aware and put to work. But that's the thinking for next one.
I forgot to mention, Beverly texted me that she was watching on Facebook today. So
Oh,
hi,
yeah.
Beverly. I don't know if you're still there. I know you can't talk because you're on Facebook.
They can talk, yeah.
I don't know
That's
who
nice.
else is on Facebook. On YouTube.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, John and Jeremiah set it up that way. So
She's on YouTube.
yeah, she's on YouTube, yeah.
So hi, Beverly.
So I want to say it was nice meeting people from all over the world. Meshkin, I met you in Maxwell when you were 10 years old. It was so nice seeing you here. I think you were 10 years old when I saw you in Maxwell. And it was very nice seeing you here.
It's nice to see you. I'm sorry I don't remember.
Me, but I remember.
And did you see our two grandkids? They left now, but they were on
Yeah.
for a while.
I missed them.
Yeah, this was interesting. We had generation from what, 11-year-old to older, much older age groups.
And Caroline is from?
Carolwood.
From
From where?
I'm Carolwood in Tampa,
Tampa. Okay. Okay.
Tampa, Florida.
Okay.
But Faraday and Michigan are in Summerland, BC.
And Judy and Lad looking good.
Hi, Lad. We didn't hear you.
How do we find you on YouTube?
I think I have to get the address from John. John, are you still here?
Oh, John and Amir?
John and
I'll
Amir,
get
yeah, they
I'll
know
get
the
it from
address. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The beach lovers.
We're going to leave the meeting.
Hey guys.
Okay.
Good night.
Thanks very
God
much,
bless.
guys. Thank
So
you.
it's
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Farhad.
Lovely seeing
Thanks,
you all.
everyone.
Good night, Vicky, Judy.
Let's go.
Lori.
Night, Vicky. Bye,
Good
Judy.
meeting
Bye,
you
Lad.
all.
Oh.
Bye, Caroline.
Martha. Oh, look at Martha came on.
didn't get to meet
Edgar.
Martha.
Lahav.
Which Martha?
So hi everybody.
Martha.
Aloha.
We finally made it. Oh my goodness. Good night, John boy.
Good night. So
Good night. Good night, Edgar.
I just wanted to say that you can access this by searching Clearwater Baha'is on YouTube, and
Thank you, John.
you can find all the videos that are posted if you just search Clearwater Baha'is.
Got it.
All right. Aloha and
Okay.
good night,
Thank you, Farhad.
Thanks very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
So same time, same
Good night.
station next Thursday, right?
Yeah, we are planning for next week the same time. See how it goes.
Okay. Wonderful. Wunderbar.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thanks, John. Thanks, Carlos.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Excuse me, I would like to ask a question.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know you can hear me because I have you when I connected to another speaker so I can hear you more clearly because
Yes,
I
can.
have my phone, I don't have a computer right now. I would like to ask, how can I connect to your every Thursday to your speeches?
Well, are you on, do you receive these emails from, where are you located?
I live in Palm Springs, California.
Okay.
oh, California.
If you, the easiest one is that if you go to this site, I'll give you the address. Do you have a pen to write right now?
You need to put it on a slide, Farhad.
Yeah, I should, but
The
You
link
want
is
me-
going to be the same every week.
it's the same as this week. But I can, would you like me to, can you see the screen? You can see the writings on the screen, right? Yeah, okay, I'll try to type it for you.
But John is saying she can use the same link as she used this week, next week again,
Yeah.
same time.
Martha, you have this link for today?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. That's why I connected to you. I just would like to know, my time is a different time. I think my time is Pacific time. So
Right.
I connect late. So that means will be 4:30, I think, my time.
Yes, same time as we had tonight. Yeah. And the same link.
It's going to be every Thursday?
Yes, that's the plan for now, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share with another Baha'is here in California close to me. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Good night, all.
Okay, good night, folks. Thanks, John.
Good night.
Good night,
Thanks,
Carlos.
Carlos. Thanks, Jeremiah, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Carlos.
Bye, Amira. I saw Amira momentarily.
Amira says bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Lois.
Very good. Was there anything else you wanted to go over?
Talking to me, Carlos? No, how did it go? What do you think?
I thought it was great.
Yeah? Yeah, it was interesting.
And
Yeah,
what is the topic for next week's going to be?
Forgiveness. Forgiveness.
Yeah.
We thought to have some of these common topics before maybe going to some other level of subjects, you know? Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. I look forward to it.
Great. Thanks for your help again.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. Good night.
Night.
How do I get out of here? Leave. Okay.
Hey, Jeremiah, can I have host